She only wanted to cover her friend's shift, but froze when she saw the patient who walked into the room. He was the man who nearly destroyed her life 15 years ago, and now he's back, injured, seductive, and with a dark plan. The coffee had been cold for at least an hour, but Emily Mitchell still held the mug between her hands, like someone clinging to a life preserver in the open sea. The office at Renewal Clinic, on the 12th floor of a commercial building in Beacon Hill, Boston, had become her refuge over the past few months. There, between walls painted a soft green and the plants she insisted on caring for personally, she managed to maintain the illusion that she had found some kind of peace. The separation was still too recent not to hurt. 7 months since she had left home with a hastily packed suitcase, leaving behind 15 years of a marriage that had died slowly, like a plant withering from lack of water that no one notices until it's too late. Richard had been a good man. She knew that. A competent engineer, punctual, predictable. Exactly the kind of person with whom a 39-year-old woman should want to rebuild her life. But Emily had discovered, in the worst possible way, that sometimes security can be the cruelest of prisons. The intercom buzzer pulled her from her thoughts. Amanda, her colleague, appeared at the door with that slightly embarrassed smile she used when she was about to ask for a favor. "Emily, I know you're already overloaded, but an emergency came up. A new patient, triage that can't wait. Dr. Martinez is in surgery, and I need to leave early today. Jacob has a high fever." Emily looked at the clock. 5:30 on a Thursday afternoon that promised to be like all the others. 40 minutes until her session with her last patient of the day, a 70-year-old woman suffering from arthritis who talked non-stop about her grandchildren. Enough time for an initial assessment. "It's fine, Amanda. Send him up." "Thank you. You're a lifesaver. His name is Ethan Morgan, accident sequelae, head trauma. He'll need prolonged monitoring." The name pierced Emily's chest like a cold blade. For a moment, the world seemed to slow down, the sound of Amanda's words reaching her distorted, as if coming from very far away. Ethan Morgan. 15 years. 15 years since she had last heard that name, shouted by herself in an argument that ended with a slammed door and an unfulfilled promise that one day they could talk calmly. "Emily, are you okay? You've gone pale." "I'm fine, just tired. You can send him up." Amanda nodded and disappeared down the hallway. Emily was alone, feeling her heart race against her ribs. Ethan Morgan. It couldn't be him. Boston had almost 700,000 inhabitants. It was statistically impossible. But the name was too unusual to be a coincidence, and that last name that he used with a somewhat arrogant pride was unmistakable. She tried to focus, organize her thoughts, prepare herself for what might be just a misunderstanding of her nervous system. She opened the patient's file on the computer. 37 years old, the age matched, car accident 3 months ago, head trauma, mild motor sequelae, episodes of fragmented amnesia, responsible family member, Isabella Morgan, sister. Emily remembered the sister. A delicate blonde girl who sometimes appeared when they were still together, always worried about her older brother, always trying to convince him to seek professional help. "He wasn't like this before," she would say. "Before our father died, he was different." The knock on the door came soft, almost hesitant. Emily took a deep breath, smoothed her hair, and opened it. It was him. Thinner, brown hair, now with grey strands at the temples, a small scar on his forehead that wasn't there before, but the eyes were the same. Those dark brown eyes that managed to be both gentle and intense, that seemed to see beyond the surface of things. And at this moment, they were fixed on her with an expression she couldn't decipher. "Emily." The voice was also the same. Husky, as if he had just woken up. As if it were natural to find her there, as if 15 years hadn't passed, as if they had seen each other the previous week. "Ethan." The name came out softer than she intended, almost a whisper. "Please, come in." He moved slowly, slightly off balance. Emily noticed that he limped a little on his left leg, and the way he held his right arm suggested some limitation of movement. The accident sequelae were real. "You can sit wherever you feel most comfortable." She gestured to the two leather armchairs in front of her desk, but Ethan chose the sofa against the wall, the same place where her most resistant patients usually settled, as if they wanted to maintain a safe distance. Emily took her clipboard and sat in the nearest armchair, trying to find the professional tone she used with all the others. But the words came out choked, artificial. "So, the medical report says you suffered an accident 3 months ago. How are you feeling? What kind of difficulties have you been facing day to day?" Ethan observed her for a long moment before answering, and Emily had the strange feeling that he was amused by her discomfort. "You've changed," he finally said, completely ignoring the question. "You're more beautiful, more mature. Marriage suited you. Ethan, we're professional and patient now. Let's focus on your treatment." "Sorry." He lowered his eyes, and for a moment he seemed genuinely embarrassed. "It's just that when I woke up in the hospital, one of the first things I remembered was your face." Strange, isn't it? How some memories stay clearer than others. Emily felt her stomach tighten. She also remembered his face, much more clearly than she would like to admit. She remembered the mornings waking up in his apartment at a time when she still thought that love could be synonymous with torment. She remembered the fights, the silences, the passionate reconciliations that made everything seem worth it. "Let's start with some basic questions," she said, returning to protocol. "Have you been having difficulty concentrating? Problems remembering recent events?" "Some. The doctors say it's normal, that it can improve with time. But there are things I remember with impressive clarity, things from years ago. You, for example. I remember how you used to make that little noise with your tongue when you were concentrating, just like you're doing now." Emily froze. She hadn't even noticed she was doing that. A nervous tic she had developed in college that appeared in moments of tension. How could he remember such a specific detail after so long? "And I remember your house," he continued, his voice getting lower. "That small house in Cambridge where you lived when we met. The yellow walls, the bookshelf full of psychology books, that large leaved plant in the living room that you watered every morning." "Ethan, and I remember the last time we saw each other. What you told me." Emily felt the air leave her. The last time. The argument at the door of his apartment, her shouting that she couldn't take it anymore, that she needed space, that maybe they should take a break. He begged, tried to hold her, said he would change, that he would seek help. She left anyway, furious and confused, promising she would call the next day to talk calmly. She never called. A week later, she moved to a different neighborhood. 2 months later, she met Richard. 6 months later, she was engaged. It was easier to start over than to try to fix the broken pieces. "I said I needed time," she murmured. "You said you loved me, but that you couldn't recognize me anymore, that I had become a stranger." The silence stretched between them like a rope pulled to its limit. Emily looked at her own hands, trying to find the right words, the words of an experienced therapist speaking to a patient who needed help. "That was a long time ago, Ethan. We've both changed, grown. You're here because you need rehabilitation, and I'll do my best to help you. But we have to keep things professional." "I know," he said, and there was something in his voice that she couldn't identify. "It's just that when I found out you worked here, I felt like the universe was giving me a second chance. Not to go back to what we were, but to say goodbye properly. For me to be able to apologize for the things I did wrong." Emily raised her eyes and was met with an expression she had never seen on his face before. Pure vulnerability, without the arrogance or manipulation that used to accompany his words in the days of their relationship, as if the accident had broken more than just bones and muscles. "You don't need to apologize for anything." "Yes, I do. I was unstable, possessive. I hurt you in ways that I only understood after you left. I spent years trying to understand what went wrong, trying to become a better man. And now, after the accident, it's as if I have an opportunity to show who I've become. Emily felt tears burning behind her eyes. 15 years. 15 years trying to forget what she had felt for him, trying to convince herself that it had been just a youthful passion, intense but superficial. And now he was there, different, but unmistakably the same, saying the words she had dreamed of hearing 2 decades ago. "Ethan, I knew you would come," he interrupted her, and there was a strange certainty in his voice. "Since I woke up in the hospital, I knew, as if everything that happened was to bring me here, to you." The phrase echoed in the office like an omen. Emily felt a shiver run up her spine, but couldn't tell if it was fear or anticipation. She looked at the clock on the wall and realized that almost an hour had passed since he arrived. Her next patient would be arriving at any moment. "We need to finish for today," she said, trying to regain control of the situation. "I'll prepare an exercise program for you, and we can schedule regular sessions. Twice a week would be ideal." Ethan nodded and got up slowly, favoring his injured leg. When he passed by her on the way to the door, Emily smelled the scent she remembered so well, woody, warm, with a touch of something she couldn't identify, the same cologne that had permeated her sheets for months after they broke up. "Emily?" He stopped with his hand on the doorknob. "Thank you for agreeing to help me. I know it can't be easy. It's my job, Ethan." He smiled, and it was as if the sun had appeared after a storm. "No, it's more than that. You've always been more than that." The door closed behind him with a soft click, leaving Emily alone with the echo of her own heartbeats. She let herself fall into the chair, her legs trembling, her mind spinning in circles. It was impossible. After all these years, all the attempts to move on, to build a stable and predictable life, he had returned. And worse, she had agreed to treat him, to see him twice a week, to share the same space, breathe the same air. She picked up the phone and dialed Amanda. "Hi, Emily, how was it with the new patient? Amanda, I need to talk to Dr. Martinez. I can't accept this case." "Why? Did something happen?" Emily hesitated. How to explain that Ethan Morgan wasn't just a patient, but an emotional time bomb that could destroy everything she had built in recent years. "It's complicated. We have a history." "Oh," Amanda understood immediately. History, or just acquaintances?" "History. I see. But Emily, you know the clinic's policy. Once the patient has been assigned and had the first consultation, we can only transfer in very specific cases. And he expressly asked to be treated by you." "He asked?" "Said he had researched the therapists at the clinic and that he would only trust your work. Dr. Martinez was impressed with his dedication to treatment." Emily hung up the phone with the feeling that she had fallen into a trap. Ethan had always been strategic, had always known exactly what to say to get what he wanted. Had he planned all this? Was the accident? No. She was being paranoid. The accident had been real. She had seen the medical reports. The sequelae were real. The vulnerability she had perceived in him also seemed genuine, but then why did she feel as if she were being watched, even alone in the office? Why did she have the impression that Ethan knew exactly what effect his presence would have on her? Emily looked out the window at the lights of Boston turning on in the approaching night. There was something inevitable about that reunion, as if the last 15 years had been just a detour on the path, and now she was back at the starting point. The question she didn't want to ask, but that echoed in her mind like a mantra, was simple and frightening. What if she had never really managed to forget him? What if, deep down, a part of her had always known this day would come? Outside, Boston's traffic continued its frantic rhythm, indifferent to the personal storms forming in the high floors of commercial buildings. And Emily Mitchell, at 39, recently separated and apparently in control of her own life, discovered that some wounds never completely heal. They just wait for the right moment to open again. The following 2 weeks passed like a sequence of lucid nightmares from which Emily couldn't wake up. Each session with Ethan was an emotional chess game, where she was never sure who was moving the pieces. He always arrived punctually, with that slightly unbalanced walk that constantly reminded her of the sequelae of the accident. But there was something in his eyes that defied any narrative of fragility. In the 3rd session, Emily decided to try a more technical, more distant approach. She had prepared a series of motor coordination exercises and cognitive tests that would keep the focus on physical rehabilitation. Anything to avoid conversations that invariably drifted into dangerous territories of the past. "Today, we're going to work with movement sequences," she announced, keeping her eyes fixed on the clipboard. "It's important to stimulate the neural connections that may have been affected by the trauma." Ethan observed her with that half-smile she knew so well, as if he were seeing through a poorly rehearsed performance. "You're nervous," he said calmly. "Your hands are shaking." Emily looked at her own hands and realized he was right. She put the clipboard on the desk with more force than intended. "I'm just focused on the work. Now please, let's start with simple wrist rotation movements." "Emily," his voice was low, almost a whisper, "why are you trying to treat me as if I were a stranger? We both know we're not." "Because that's exactly what we are," she replied, but the words came out less convincing than she had hoped. 15 years changed everything, Ethan. I changed, you changed. We're different people. Do you really think so? They hadn't touched on the subject since the first session, but Emily felt the question hanging in the air at each meeting. "Then why, when you get nervous, do you still put your hand on your neck exactly as you did at 24? Why do you still bite your lower lip when you're concentrating? Why did you choose to wear the same perfume you wore when we met?" Emily felt the blood rise to her face. She hadn't even realized she was wearing Florata, the fragrance she had first bought during her college days and which she unconsciously associated with moments of change in her life. She had started wearing it again after the separation, like a silent talisman. "You're crossing professional boundaries," she said, trying to regain control of the situation. "And you're lying to yourself." Ethan got up slowly and walked to the window, turning his back to her. "You know what else I remember, Emily? I remember the night we met. You were at the Roxbury Community Center coordinating that art therapy project for at-risk teenagers. You were wearing a dark green blouse and your hair was tied back with small clips that kept falling out." Emily felt her chest tighten. She remembered that night with painful clarity. She was 24, in her final year of occupational therapy school, and had volunteered for the social project. It was May, it was cold, and she had arrived late because the subway had broken down. "You were trying to convince a boy named Diego to participate in the painting workshop," Ethan continued, still with his back to her. "He refused to touch the brushes, said art was for rich people, and you sat on the floor, took a sheet of paper and started drawing with your finger, using only the dirt that had stuck to your shoe. Ethan, please." "You drew a tree. A giant tree with deep roots and branches that touched the sky. And you told him that art wasn't about having expensive materials, but about finding beauty anywhere. Diego was hypnotized. We all were." Emily closed her eyes, trying to block the images that emerged too clearly in her memory. Diego, a 15-year-old boy with angry eyes and hands that trembled from withdrawal. The improvised workshop in the basement of the community center. The smell of tempera paint mixed with dampness. And Ethan, who had appeared halfway through the project as another volunteer, but who from the first day seemed more interested in observing her than in helping the teenagers. "I fell in love with you that night," he said, finally turning to face her. "It wasn't physical attraction, it wasn't curiosity. It was something bigger, deeper, as if I had found the person I was looking for without knowing I was looking. That was a long time ago." Emily murmured, but her voice came out weak, betraying the emotion she was trying to hide. It was, and you know what else was a long time ago? The day you left me. The day I woke up and discovered that you had disappeared from my life as if you had never existed. The accusation in his voice was unmistakable, and Emily felt a mixture of guilt and anger growing in her chest. She knew she had run away, knew she had been a coward, but she also knew she had had no choice. Their relationship was unsustainable, destructive for both. I needed to leave, Ethan. I couldn't recognize myself in the person I was becoming when I was with you. And what person was that? A dependent person, insecure, someone who lived on the roller coaster of your mood swings, who never knew if you were going to be affectionate or distant, present or absent. The words came out like a torrent dammed up for years. I loved you, but I was losing myself in the process. Ethan was silent for a long moment, processing the words. When he spoke again, his voice was lower, almost vulnerable. I know I was difficult. I know I hurt you. My father had died a few months before we met. I was lost, full of anger. You appeared in my life like a light, and I clung to that light so tightly that I almost extinguished it. Emily felt tears burning behind her eyes. This was the conversation they had never had, the explanation she had waited for months before giving up and moving on. Why did you never tell me this at the time? Because I was 22 and didn't know how to deal with loss. Because I thought showing vulnerability was a sign of weakness. Because he hesitated, running his hand through his hair. Because I was afraid that if you saw who I really was beneath all that anger, you'd discover I wasn't worth staying for. Ethan, let me finish. He approached, and Emily could feel the heat of his body, the familiar scent that instantly transported her to other times. I spent the last 15 years trying to become the man I should have been for you. I went to therapy, worked on my traumas, learned to deal with my emotions in a healthy way. And when I woke up in the hospital after the accident, the first thing I thought was that it might be a second chance. Second chance for what? To show you who I've become. To ask for forgiveness the right way. He stopped a few inches from her, so close that Emily could see the small scars on his face that were the result of the accident. To find out if there's still anything between us besides resentment. The silence that followed was charged with an electric tension that made the air in the office seem thicker. Emily knew she should step away, maintain professional distance, remind herself of all the reasons why this was a terrible idea. But there was something in the way Ethan looked at her, an intensity she hadn't seen in years, that made her question all the decisions she had made since leaving him. We can't, she whispered, more to herself than to him. Why? Because you're my therapist. Because too much time has passed. Because you're afraid. Because I'm not the same person you knew. Because I got married, separated, built a life you don't know. Because you still feel it, he completed. And it wasn't a question. Emily opened her mouth to deny it, to say he was wrong, that what she felt was just nostalgia, a passing emotional confusion. But the words didn't come out. Instead, she heard herself asking, "How did you know I worked here?" The question came out of nowhere. But as soon as she asked it, Emily realized that this was what had been bothering her since the first session. Boston was a huge city. There were hundreds of rehabilitation clinics. How had he specifically arrived at Renewal Clinic? How did he know she worked there? Ethan hesitated for a fraction of a second, a flash of something she couldn't identify passing through his eyes. Research. When the doctors said I would need monitoring with an occupational therapist, I researched the best clinics in the city. I found the Renewal website, saw your photo on the team page. I thought it was a coincidence of fate. The explanation was plausible, but there was something in the way he said it, too quick, too rehearsed, that made Emily frown. She knew Ethan well enough to know when he was omitting something. You didn't look for me before, in all these years? No. The answer came immediately, categorical. I respected your decision to leave. I thought you had moved on, that it was better to leave the past in the past. But you knew I had gotten married. I found out by chance. I met Isabella a few years ago. She mentioned that she had seen your name on the guest list of a wedding of a mutual acquaintance. That's all." Emily nodded, but the feeling that there was something more continued to bother her. There were small details that didn't fit, comments that Ethan made that demonstrated knowledge about her life that went beyond what he should know. Like when he mentioned that she watered plants in the morning, a habit she had developed only in recent years. Like when he talked about her psychology books, he couldn't know that she had specialized in family trauma after they separated. "Emily?" His voice brought her back to the present. He was closer now, so close that she could see the small lines of expression around his eyes, signs that he too had aged, had also suffered. "What are you thinking about?" "About how complicated all this is," she admitted. "It doesn't have to be." "Yes, it does. I'm your therapist. There's a code of ethics, professional responsibilities. If someone finds out..." "No one will find out." The way he said it, with an almost arrogant certainty, made Emily take a step back. For a moment, it was as if she had seen a glimpse of the Ethan from 15 years ago, manipulative and too confident in his own persuasion abilities. "Ethan, I think we need to keep things strictly professional. You need help to recover from the accident, and I can offer that help, but we can't confuse things." He studied her for a long moment, and Emily had the uncomfortable feeling that she was being analyzed, as if he were calculating the next move in a game only he knew the rules to. "All right," he finally said, but there was something in the tone of voice that didn't sound like acceptance. "If that's what you want, it's what needs to be. I understand." Ethan went back to the sofa and sat down, suddenly seeming more fragile, more affected by the sequelae of the accident. "Then let's continue with the motor coordination exercises." The rest of the session passed in a climate of contained tension. Emily tried to focus on the exercises, on the assessment of Ethan's range of motion, on the technical notes she needed to make, but she was hyper-aware of each of his movements, of each look, of each time their hands accidentally touched during the tests. When the session ended, Ethan got up slowly and walked to the door. With his hand on the doorknob, he turned one last time. "Emily?" "Yes. Thank you for giving me this chance. I know it's not easy for you." She nodded, not trusting her own voice to answer. After he left, Emily was alone in the office, feeling as if she had just gone through a hurricane. Her hands were shaking, her heart racing, and there was a strange feeling in her stomach that she preferred not to analyze too deeply. She picked up the phone and dialed Richard. They still talked occasionally, cordial conversations about the division of assets and practical issues of the divorce. But this time, Emily needed to hear a familiar voice, something that would anchor her in the reality she had built over the past years. "Hi, Emily. Everything okay?" "Hi, Richard. Sorry to bother you. I just wanted to..." "How are you?" "Well, thank you. Working a lot, you know how it is. And you sound strange. Your voice is different." Emily hesitated. How to explain that her past had returned in the form of a patient with neurological sequelae and eyes that could still completely disarm her? "Just a tough day at work. Nothing major." "Are you sure? If you need to talk..." "Yes, I'm sure. Thank you, Richard. Take care." She hung up before he could ask more questions. Richard was a good man, had been a dedicated husband, and would always be a friend. But he had never awakened in her the kind of devastating passion that Ethan could provoke with just a look. And that, Emily was beginning to realize, might be both a blessing and a curse. That night, in her apartment in Beacon Hill, Emily tried to focus on a neuroscience book she was reading to professionally update herself. But the words danced on the page without forming meaning, and her mind kept returning to the afternoon's conversation. There was something about Ethan that was different from the man she had known 15 years ago, but also something disturbingly familiar. As if he had matured in some aspects, but remained exactly the same in others. Around 11 at night, when she finally gave up reading and was preparing to sleep, the phone rang. Unknown number. Hello? Emily? It's me. Ethan's voice, low and intimate as if they were talking on the pillow. Ethan, how did you get my number? It's in the clinic's contact sheet. In case of emergencies. What emergency? I couldn't stop thinking about our conversation today. I need to see you. Ethan, we've already discussed this. We can't. Not as therapist and patient. As Emily and Ethan. As two people who had a history and who might need to end it properly. Emily felt her heart accelerate. There was something in his voice, an urgency that made her want to yield. Where? You know the cafe on Newbury Street? The one near the art gallery where we used to go? Emily knew it. More than that, she remembered the afternoons they had spent there, talking about books and dreams and plans for the future that never materialized. Ethan, this is a terrible idea. Maybe. But sometimes the worst ideas are the ones most worth trying. Emily closed her eyes, fighting against the urge to say yes. She knew she should hang up, block the number, maintain professional distance. But there was a part of her, a part she thought was buried 15 years ago, that was desperate to know what it would be like to see him outside the office, in an environment that wasn't contaminated by protocols and ethical responsibilities. Tomorrow at 8, she heard her own voice say, just to talk, to close this cycle once and for all. Perfect. See you tomorrow, Emily. He hung up before she could change her mind. Emily stood in the middle of the living room, phone in hand, realizing that she had just made a decision that could change everything. Outside, Boston continued its nocturnal dance of lights and movement, indifferent to the small personal dramas unfolding in apartments and houses scattered throughout the city. And Emily, at 39, discovered that some decisions aren't made by reason, but by the heart, even when the heart should have long ago learned to be silent. The corner art cafe had changed little in 15 years. The same scratched wooden tables, the same mismatched chairs, the same smell of roasted coffee mixed with incense and dampness that characterized the bohemian establishments on Newbury Street. Emily arrived 10 minutes late on purpose, a small attempt to maintain some control over the situation. But when she pushed the glass door and saw Ethan sitting in the corner where they used to stay, she felt all her defenses crumble like sand castles. He was different outside the clinical environment. He wore a dark blue button-down shirt, open at the collar, jeans, and a leather jacket that Emily didn't remember seeing before. His hair was slightly messy, as if he had run his hand through it several times, a nervous gesture she knew well. When he saw her, he smiled, and it was as if 15 years dissolved into thin air. "I thought you wouldn't come," he said, standing up to greet her. "I thought the same thing," Emily admitted, accepting the kiss on the cheek he offered. For a moment, she was enveloped by the familiar scent, by the proximity, by the disturbing feeling of being exactly where she should be. She sat in the opposite chair, keeping the table between them as a symbolic barrier. Ethan ordered 2 coffees. He still remembered that she liked hers with brown sugar, and for a few minutes they sat in silence, observing each other like two ex-combatants trying to assess the changes caused by time. "You cut your hair," he finally said. 3 years ago. Emily ran her hand through her hair that now only reached her shoulders. "Richard always said it looked more elegant short." "Richard is your ex-husband?" "Yes." She hesitated, then decided there was no reason to hide. "We separated 8 months ago. It was amicable. We grew in different directions." Ethan nodded, but Emily noticed a flash of satisfaction in his eyes that bothered her, as if the information confirmed something he already expected. "And you?" she asked. "Never married?" "Almost. 5 years ago. I dated a woman for 3 years. We even got engaged. Caroline. Lawyer, intelligent, beautiful. She was everything any man should want. What happened?" Ethan rotated the coffee in his cup, thoughtful. "She said I was never completely present, that there was a part of me that always seemed to be somewhere else, with someone else. And she was right. Emily felt her stomach tighten. Ethan. No, let me speak. I tried, Emily. I tried hard to build a normal life, to love another person the way she deserved. But you're like a song that gets stuck in your head. The more I tried to forget, the stronger it became. That's not healthy. I know. Believe me, I know. I went to therapy for years, trying to understand why I couldn't move on. My therapist said sometimes we cling to intense relationships because we confuse drama with true love. Emily frowned. There was something familiar about that observation, as if she had heard those words before. And what did you think of that theory? I thought she was right. Until I saw you again. Ethan leaned forward, his eyes fixed on hers. Then I realized it wasn't drama. It was recognition, as if my soul recognized yours. Ethan, please, don't talk like that. Why? Because it scares you? Because you feel the same thing and it terrifies you? Emily lowered her eyes to the coffee, trying to focus on the dark liquid instead of the intensity of his gaze. But he was right. She did feel it. From the first moment she saw him in the office, a part of her that she thought was dead had awakened, and that terrified her more than anything. Tell me about the accident, she said, changing the subject. Ethan's expression closed slightly. What do you want to know? How it happened. The medical reports are very technical, but they never really tell what the person was doing when... I was driving at night, raining. We lost control of the car and I hit a pole. The answer came quickly, almost automatically. I lost control. Emily noticed the correction, but decided not to push. Instead, she observed his body language. Ethan had always been a terrible liar when he was nervous. His left foot would start to shake imperceptibly. He would run his hand through his hair more times than normal, and he would avoid direct eye contact. Right now, he was doing all those things. Where were you going? I don't remember. The memories of that night are confused. The doctors said it's normal in cases of head trauma. Emily nodded, but the feeling that there was something more continued to bother her. She decided to try a different approach. And your family? How is Isabella? Well, worried, as always. She was the one who took care of everything while I was in the hospital. Paperwork, doctors, insurance. I don't know what I'd do without her. Does she know you're doing therapy with me? Ethan hesitated for a fraction of a second. She knows I'm doing therapy. I didn't go into details about who the therapist is. Why? Because she would remember you. And because she would be worried that I was trying to relive the past instead of focusing on recovery. The answer made sense. But there was something in the way Ethan said it that didn't sound completely true. Emily knew Isabella. She was a practical, direct woman who never had problems saying exactly what she thought. If she knew that Emily was treating her brother, she would certainly have something to say about it. Ethan, can I ask you a personal question? All your questions have been personal, he said with a half smile. During these 15 years, you never tried to contact me? Not even once? He observed her for a long moment, as if weighing how much of the truth he could reveal. Once, he finally admitted. About 7 years ago, I found out where you worked at the time, a clinic in Brookline. I went there, waited in the parking lot for hours, just to see you leave. Emily felt a shiver run up her spine. You saw me? I did. You were with a man. Tall, dark hair, gray suit, probably your husband. You looked happy. He kissed you before you got into the car, and you smiled in a way you never smiled at me. Ethan, I stood there, watching you leave, and realized I had lost my chance, that you had found someone who made you happy without all the drama, without all the destructive intensity that I brought. And I decided that the best thing I could do for you was to leave you in peace. Emily felt tears burning behind her eyes. The idea of Ethan observing her from a distance, seeing her with Richard, making the decision not to interfere in the life she had built, was both touching and disturbing. Why are you telling me this now? Because you asked. and because I don't want any more lies between us. We've had too many lies already." Emily nodded, but there was a contradiction that bothered her. If Ethan had decided to leave her in peace 7 years ago, what had changed? Why now, after the accident, had he decided to seek her out? As if reading her thoughts, he continued, "After the accident, when I woke up in the hospital, I had a lot of time to think. About life, death, lost opportunities. And I realized that I had spent 15 years living halfway, always wondering, what if? I decided that I didn't want to die without at least trying to talk to you. Without knowing if there was any possibility of what? Of us. Of a second chance. Of finding out if two people can change enough to make it work on the second try." The silence that followed was charged with possibilities and dangers. Emily knew she should stand up, thank him for the conversation, say it had been good to have closure, and leave. She knew she should maintain professional distance, transfer the case to another therapist, return to her safe and predictable life. Instead, she heard herself asking, "What would you do if I said I feel something too?" Ethan's eyes lit up as if she had just given him the most valuable gift in the world. "I would take you to a place where we could talk without interruptions, where we could find out if we still know each other after all these years." "What place?" "My apartment. It's close to here in Back Bay. View of the park, quiet, private." Emily knew that going to his apartment was crossing a line from which there would be no return. She knew she was about to make a decision that could destroy her career, her emotional stability, perhaps her sanity. "Okay," she said. Ethan's apartment was on the 10th floor of a modern building with a view of the Boston Public Garden. It was larger than Emily expected, decorated with contemporary furniture and some pieces of art that she didn't recognize. There was something impersonal about the environment, as if he hadn't lived there long, or as if he were just passing through. "It's nice," she said, walking to the window overlooking the park. "I bought it after I ended things with Caroline. I wanted to start from scratch, without memories of old relationships." Emily realized the irony of the situation. She was there, in the apartment he had bought to forget the past, about to relive exactly what he had tried to leave behind. "Would you like something to drink?" "I have wine, beer, water." "Wine is good." Ethan disappeared into the kitchen and returned with a bottle of red and 2 glasses. While he served, Emily explored the living room, observing the details that might give her clues about who he had become in recent years. There were few personal objects, few photographs. On the bookshelf, books on psychology, neuroscience, some novels. And then she saw something that made her stop. "You read this?" she asked, picking up a copy of Trauma and Recovery by Judith Herman. "I did. I found it interesting, especially the chapter on abusive relationships and emotional dependency." Emily flipped through the book and noticed it was full of notes in the margins, underlined passages, page markers, as if Ethan had studied the text with the dedication of an academic. "Why were you interested in this subject?" "Because of you," he said simply. "I wanted to understand our dynamic, understand why I couldn't forget you, why our relationship was so intense and so destructive at the same time." Emily felt a chill. There was something disturbing about the idea of Ethan studying books on trauma to better understand her, as if he were trying to find a formula, a way to manipulate her emotions more efficiently. "And what did you learn?" "That sometimes the line between love and obsession is thinner than we'd like to admit. That people with histories of abandonment tend to be attracted to emotionally unavailable partners. That patterns repeat until they're consciously broken." Emily put the book back on the shelf, but the feeling of discomfort remained. There was something too methodical in the way Ethan talked about relationships, as if he were applying theoretical knowledge instead of talking about genuine feelings. "Emily," he approached, offering her a glass of wine. "What are you thinking about?" "About how strange all this is. The two of us here after so many years, as if nothing had changed." "A lot has changed. We've changed. But maybe some things are bigger than time. He was very close now, so close that Emily could feel the heat of his body, see the small lines of expression around his eyes, notice how his breathing had become faster. The sexual tension that had been building up over the past weeks finally found a space to manifest itself. "Ethan, I don't know if this is a good idea." "Stop thinking," he whispered, bringing his face closer to hers. "For once in your life, just feel." The kiss, when it finally happened, was like coming home after a long journey. Familiar and new at the same time, urgent and tender, charged with 15 years of pent-up longing. Emily gave herself completely, forgetting all the reasons why this was wrong, all the risks, all the consequences. When they separated, both were breathless. Ethan rested his forehead against hers, and Emily could see the desire in his dark eyes. "I love you," he said. "I never stopped loving you." "Ethan, stay with me tonight. Not as therapist and patient, not as past and present. As us." Emily knew she should say no. She knew she was about to cross an ethical line that could destroy her career. She knew she was putting herself in a vulnerable position with a man who had already broken her heart once. But when she looked into his eyes, she saw not only desire, but something deeper. A vulnerability that he rarely showed, a need that went beyond the physical. And she realized that she needed this too, needed to know if there was still something real between them, if all the tension and all the longing had foundation. "Just tonight," she whispered. What happened in the following hours was an explosion of pent-up passion that swept away all of Emily's defenses. They made love with a desperate hunger, as if they were trying to recover 15 years in a single night. Ethan knew her as if she were still the 24-year-old woman he had lost, but also seemed to discover the 39-year-old woman she had become. Afterwards, lying in his bed, Emily felt both complete and terrified. There was something almost addictive in the way Ethan touched her, as if he knew exactly which buttons to push to make her melt. It was dangerous, she knew, but it was also irresistible. "I can't believe you're here," he murmured against her hair. "Neither can I. Do you regret it?" Emily took a while to answer. She should regret it. But all she felt was a deep satisfaction, a feeling that she had finally returned to where she belonged. "No," she finally said, "but I can't continue being your therapist." "I know. I'll request a transfer tomorrow. And then? Then we'll find out if we can make this work. If we can be happy together without all the pain of the first time." Emily nodded, but there was a small voice in the back of her mind, warning her about the fact that some things seemed too easy, as if Ethan had planned each step of the seduction with almost surgical precision, as if he knew exactly what to say, when to say it, how to touch her to make her yield. But she silenced that voice, at least for now. It was when she was almost falling asleep that she heard Ethan speaking softly on the phone in the bathroom. He thought she was sleeping, but Emily had always been a light sleeper. "It's working exactly as we planned," he was saying. She took the bait completely. Now it's just a matter of time. Emily felt her blood freeze in her veins. She remained motionless, pretending to sleep, trying to hear more of the conversation. But Ethan lowered his voice even more, and she could only catch fragments. "Clinic file. Next week. She won't suspect anything." The call ended, and Emily heard his steps returning to the bedroom. She closed her eyes and regulated her breathing, pretending to be deeply asleep when he lay down beside her. But sleep didn't come. Instead, Emily stayed awake until dawn, her mind spinning around the words she had heard. "It's working exactly as we planned." What was working? What plan? And who was the other person on the call? For the first time since Ethan had reappeared in her life, Emily began to wonder if all of this wasn't exactly what it seemed. If the accident, the choice of clinic, even the renewed intensity between them weren't part of something much more calculated and sinister than she had imagined. When the sun began to come through the windows of the apartment, Emily got up silently, put on her clothes, and left without waking him. She needed time to think, to process not only what had happened between them, but also what she had heard. On the street, waiting for the Uber she had called, Emily looked up at the window of Ethan's apartment. He was there, watching her through the glass with an expression she couldn't decipher from a distance. But one thing was clear: none of this was coincidence, and she had just placed herself at the center of a game whose rules she didn't know. The following days passed like a thick fog from which Emily couldn't fully emerge. She had requested a transfer of Ethan's case, citing personal conflict of interest, and Dr. Martinez had accepted without asking many questions. But that didn't mean she could get him out of her head or stop analyzing every word of the phone conversation she had overheard. "It's working exactly as we planned." The words echoed in her mind during sessions with other patients, during meals she could barely swallow, during sleepless nights when she relived every moment of the night they spent together. There was something rotten behind all that calculated seduction, and Emily felt like an idiot for having fallen so easily into the trap. Ethan had tried to contact her several times. Messages on her cell phone, calls she didn't answer, even flowers delivered to the clinic with a note asking them to talk. Emily ignored everything. She needed distance to understand what was really happening, to discover what the plan was that he had mentioned in the mysterious call. It was Amanda who gave her the first clue, without knowing. "Emily, did you hear about the fire?" she asked on a Thursday, entering the break room where Emily was having coffee alone. "What fire?" "In the dead files. It happened in the early hours of yesterday. Small, but well located. It only burned a specific section, the one where the old medical records are kept. Strange, isn't it? As if someone knew exactly where to attack." Emily felt her stomach contract. "Any suspicion of how it started?" "The police said it could have been a short circuit, but I thought it was weird. The security cameras were turned off for maintenance just that night. What a coincidence, right?" That afternoon, Emily went down to the basement where the archive was located. The smell of smoke still permeated the air, and there were police isolation tapes in several sections. She knew the employee responsible for the archive, Mr. Oscar, a man in his 60s who had worked at the clinic for decades. "Mr. Oscar, which section exactly was hit by the fire?" "Oh, Ms. Emily, it was very specific, you see, just the files from 2008 to 2010. Very strange, as if someone had handpicked it. 2008 to 2010. Exactly the period when Emily had met Ethan, when she was still in college and doing internships at various clinics. It couldn't be a coincidence. "Mr. Oscar, do you happen to remember if there was any file of mine in that section, from when I was an intern?" The man scratched his head, thoughtful. "Well, there might have been. In those days, you interns sometimes did preliminary screenings, right? But now it'll be hard to know what was lost." Emily left the archive with more questions than answers. Why would Ethan want to burn old records? What was in those files that he didn't want her to see? That night, at home, she decided to do her own investigation. She called Isabella, Ethan's sister. They hadn't spoken in 15 years, but Emily remembered the phone number. Isabella had always used the same number. "Emily?" Isabella's voice sounded surprised, but not hostile. "Wow, what a surprise. How are you?" "Hi, Isabella. I know it's strange for me to call after so long, but I need to ask you something about Ethan." "About Ethan? Did you two reconnect?" Emily hesitated. "In a way. He's doing therapy at the clinic where I work because of the accident." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Isabella, are you there?" "I am. It's just that..." "Emily, what accident?" Emily's world seemed to tilt slightly. "The car accident. 3 months ago, head trauma, motor sequelae. My God, Emily, Ethan didn't have any car accident. He tried to kill himself." The words hit Emily like a punch to the stomach. "What? He jumped from the balcony of his apartment, 4th floor. Luckily, he fell on an awning that cushioned the fall, otherwise he would have died. He was hospitalized for 3 weeks, had some fractures, but nothing too serious. I thought he had told you. Emily felt like she was sinking. Isabella, why would he do that? He had been obsessed with you again. I didn't know you had started talking again, but in the weeks before what happened, he only talked about you, said he had found a way to get you back, that he had a plan. I thought he was delirious, you know. He was always too intense when it came to you. What kind of plan? I'm not sure. He mentioned something about discovering things from your past, about using it to... Emily, he was in a very bad phase, obsessive, paranoid. I tried to convince him to seek help, but he said he didn't need to, that soon everything would be resolved. Emily hung up the phone with trembling hands. Suicide attempt, obsession. A plan to get her back. The pieces were starting to fit together in a terrifying way. The next morning, even before going to work, Emily went to Ethan's apartment. She needed answers, and she needed them now. She used the spare key he had given her the night they spent together, a gesture that at the time she had interpreted as trust, but which now seemed part of a larger strategy. The apartment was empty, but Emily could feel Ethan's recent presence in the air. She began to search, not knowing exactly what she expected to find. In the office, she found a table covered with papers, photographs, and newspaper clippings. Her heart raced when she realized that everything referred to her. There were photos of her leaving the clinic, of her old house with Richard, of the supermarket where she shopped. Some were clearly old from years ago, but others were recent, very recent. Ethan had been watching her for much longer than he had admitted. Even more disturbing was a detailed dossier on her life, information about her marriage, her divorce, her habits, her schedules. And at the center of it all, a copy of a medical record she had never seen before. The header said, Hope Clinic, patient Emily Mitchell, date March 15, 2009, responsible therapist Dr. Beatrice Villela. Emily read with growing horror. The medical record described therapy sessions she didn't remember having at a clinic where she had never been. According to the document, she had sought professional help after an abusive relationship that resulted in severe emotional dependency and suicidal ideation. The notes were detailed and disturbing. They mentioned episodes of self-harm, obsessive attempts to contact the ex-boyfriend, and borderline personality with self-destructive tendencies. On the last page, a handwritten note said, Patient shows resistance to treatment, denies the reality of traumatic events. I recommend compulsory psychiatric hospitalization. Emily felt nausea rising in her throat. None of that was true. She had never done therapy at that time, had never self-harmed, had never tried obsessive contact with Ethan. On the contrary, she had been the one to leave him. But the medical record seemed authentic. It had official letterheads, stamps, signatures, and the therapist's handwriting seemed genuine, with small imperfections that would be difficult to forge. It was then that she found a separate folder with documents about Dr. Beatrice Villela. The woman had disappeared in April 2009, a month after the supposed last session with Emily. Her body was never found. The police investigated, but there were never any suspects or concrete clues. Emily was beginning to understand the dimension of what Ethan had done. He had forged a detailed psychiatric record using information he had collected about her over the years, and somehow he was connected to the disappearance of the therapist who had supposedly treated her. Impressive detective work. Ethan's voice behind her made her jump. He was standing in the doorway of the office, observing her with an expression that mixed admiration and disappointment. I expected you to take longer to discover. Or maybe never to discover. Emily turned to face him, the fake medical record still in her hand. What is this, Ethan? What have you done? What I needed to do. He entered the office and closed the door behind him, a gesture that didn't go unnoticed by Emily. You were always too stubborn for your own good. You forged a psychiatric record, burned clinic files, and what happened to Dr. Beatrice? Ethan smiled, but there was no warmth in the expression. Beatrice was a temporary collaborator. Unfortunately, she developed scruples about our project. Our project? Yes, Emily, ours. All of this is for us, to give us a second chance without all the baggage of the past. Emily felt genuine terror for the first time. You're insane. I'm in love. And sometimes the line between the two is thinner than we'd like to admit. He approached slowly, and Emily realized there was something different about him. The vulnerability she had seen in recent weeks had completely disappeared, replaced by a calculating coldness. You know what your problem is, Emily. You always think you know what's best for you, but you don't. 15 years ago, you thought it would be better to leave me, to marry a safe and predictable man, to build a small, controlled life. And I was right. Look what you've become. I've become someone who loves you enough to do anything to get you back. Anything, Emily. She tried to move toward the door, but Ethan blocked the way. The fake medical record goes to the clinic management this afternoon, he continued conversationally, along with photos of you entering my building, location records from your cell phone showing you spent the night here, carefully edited recordings of intimate conversations. Recordings? Your phone is easier to hack than you imagine. I have everything, Emily. Your career, your reputation, your mental sanity, all in my hands. Emily felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. What do you want? I want you to stop fighting against us. I want you to accept that we are inevitable. You'll request leave from the clinic for personal reasons. You'll move in here and we'll restart our life together. Without external interference, without judgments, without anything that could separate us again. And if I refuse, then the medical record goes not only to the clinic, but to the psychology board, to your former colleagues, to Richard, to everyone who knows you. You'll be seen as an unstable therapist who became sexually involved with a vulnerable patient. Your career will be over, your credibility will be destroyed, and you'll still have to deal with the recommendation for compulsory psychiatric hospitalization that's at the end of the medical record. Emily looked at the man in front of her and finally understood the extent of the trap she had fallen into. Ethan wasn't just obsessive, he was dangerous. And he had planned every detail of the emotional and professional blackmail with frightening precision. You killed Dr. Beatrice, didn't you? Beatrice became a problem when she developed a conscience in the middle of the work. She had agreed to create the record in exchange for a considerable amount of money. She had gambling debts she couldn't pay. But when she realized the document would be used to harm you, she tried to back out. She even threatened to report me. So you killed her. I convinced her to change her mind. Permanently. Emily felt bile rising in her throat. She was locked in an apartment with a murderer who claimed to love her. Why, Ethan? Why all this? Because you're mine, Emily. You always have been. And I spent 15 years watching you live a half-life with a man who never understood you, never desired you the way I desire you. You can pretend you're happy with your safe little life, but I know the truth. I saw it in the way you gave yourself to me last week. You feel it too. You also know that we are inevitable. Emily realized she needed to change her strategy. Direct confrontation wasn't working, and she was clearly at a physical and logistical disadvantage. She decided to try to appeal to what remained of humanity in him. Ethan, if you really love me, you can't want to force me to stay with you. True love isn't possession, it's freedom of choice. Beautiful philosophy, but you've already had your chance to choose freely and you chose wrong. Now the choice is mine. And if I stay, if I accept your conditions, do you really think you can build a real relationship based on blackmail and fear? I can build any kind of relationship I want, and with time, you'll stop resisting. You'll realize that here, with me, you're more yourself than you've ever been with anyone else. Emily looked into his eyes and saw not just obsession, but genuine madness. Ethan had convinced himself that he was doing all this out of love, when in reality he was just satisfying a sick need for control. It was then that she heard sirens in the distance. Ethan's expression changed slightly. "What are those sirens?" Emily smiled for the first time since she had discovered the truth. "They're from the police. They're coming here." "Impossible. Nobody knows where you are." "Isabella knows. I called her before coming here. I told her about our conversation, about what you had told me about the accident. She was worried and decided to meet me here." Emily was bluffing but kept her voice firm. "And there's more. Before coming up, I sent a message to Amanda telling her everything about the fake medical record, about your threats, about Dr. Beatrice. If anything happens to me, she has instructions to deliver everything to the police." The sirens were closer now, and Emily could see from Ethan's face that he was beginning to realize that his meticulous plan had holes he hadn't anticipated. "You're lying," he said, but there was uncertainty in his voice. "Am I? Do you want to risk it?" Ethan stood still for a long moment, clearly calculating his options. The sirens stopped in front of the building, and Emily heard car doors slamming. "It's not over," he finally said. "Even if they arrest me, even if they destroy the evidence, this isn't over. You're mine, Emily. You always will be." "No," she answered with a firmness that surprised herself. "I was never yours, and now I understand that I never will be. What you feel for me isn't love, it's sickness, and I'd rather be alone than live as your prisoner." The knock on the door was loud and authoritative. "Police! Open the door!" Ethan looked at Emily one last time, and she saw something die in his eyes, the fantasy he had fed for 15 years finally dissolving in reality. "I love you," he said, almost like a plea. "No," Emily responded calmly. "You love me like a collector loves his butterflies, pinned in a frame, dead and immobile. That's not love. It's possession." The door opened with a crash as the police broke it down. Ethan didn't resist arrest, but his eyes remained fixed on Emily until the moment they took him away. 6 months later, Emily was in her new office in Cambridge, seeing her last patient of the day. She had left the renewal clinic after the whole truth came out, but not because of scandal or loss of credibility. On the contrary, her courage in reporting Ethan and exposing his scheme had been widely recognized by colleagues. The trial had been quick. With the evidence the police found in the apartment, including details about Dr. Beatrice's disappearance and recorded confessions that Ethan had made without realizing, he was sentenced to 20 years in prison. Emily had spent the first months in intensive therapy, working not only on the recent trauma, but also on deeper issues about her relationship patterns. She discovered that her attraction to Ethan had been in part the result of childhood abandonment traumas that she had never fully processed. "So, how do you feel about dating again?" asked Dr. Sandra Reyes, her therapist. Emily smiled. "Honestly, I'm still not sure if I'm ready, but for the first time in a long time, I'm okay with myself. I don't feel like I need someone to complete me. That's immense progress." "It is. And you know what else? I'm starting to understand the difference between passion and love. Passion is what I felt for Ethan. Intense, obsessive, destructive. True love is calm, safe, built on trust and mutual respect." That night, returning home, Emily passed by the cafe on Newbury Street where she had met with Ethan months before. She no longer felt the tightness in her chest that used to accompany these memories. Instead, she felt a strange gratitude. The experience with Ethan, as traumatic as it had been, had forced Emily to confront parts of herself that she had been avoiding for years. She had learned to recognize the signs of emotional manipulation, to value her own safety, to not confuse intensity with intimacy. 3 weeks later, she met Paul in a bookstore. He was a literature professor, divorced, father of an 8-year-old girl. Kind, funny, completely different from any man she'd ever been involved with. When he invited her for coffee, Emily accepted without hesitation. The first date was peaceful. Paul didn't try to impress her with grand gestures or intense declarations. They talked about books, about work, about the small things that make life worth living. He made her laugh in a light and natural way that Emily hadn't experienced in years. When they said goodbye, he didn't try to kiss her or pressure for a second date. He simply said that he had really enjoyed meeting her and that he hoped to see her again. Emily knew she still had a lot of work to do on herself, a lot of growth ahead. But for the first time since she had separated from Richard, she felt hopeful about the future. She had learned that she deserved a gentle, respectful love, one that didn't try to control or change her. And maybe, with Paul, she was finally on the right path. The next morning, Emily woke up in her apartment full of plants and natural light, prepared her favorite breakfast, and looked at herself in the mirror. The woman she saw there was stronger, wiser, more complete than she had ever been. Ethan had tried to destroy her in order to rebuild her according to his own desires. But Emily had discovered something he would never understand. She didn't need to be rebuilt by anyone. She was perfect exactly as she was, with her scars, her fears, her strengths, and her weaknesses. And that discovery was worth all the nightmares she had gone through.